Hello, fictional. Welcome to the Fiction Series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei got harem with Gabriel, Raynare and Irina? The movie. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Prologue. The biblical god, leader of the famous angel faction, father to all angels and seraphs, was currently lying in a pool of his own blood. The four devil kings, Lucifer, Leviathan, Asmodeus and Beelzebub. These four had managed to break through the defenses of heaven and had gotten far enough to reach God. However, God had fought and defeated all four of them, but he surely did not come out unscathed. The wounds they inflicted on the Holy Father were certainly fatal and would soon end his life. But he had enough strength to form smile as the doors to his throne room burst open. "Father, what have they done to you?" exclaimed Michael, horrified at the sight upon him. Gabriel, Michael's sister, began crying and clutched his arm tightly as the sight of their father dying was too much for her. She looked away as she held her brother tightly. Michael frowned and hugged his sister, comforting her. God struggled to raise his head to look at his son and daughter. But Michael saw this and immediately helped his father raise his head. Michael held the back of God's head and checked his wounds. There were many cuts and bruises visible, but that wasn't the most troubling of God's wounds, for there was a gaping hole on his stomach. "It's alright," Michael spoke God softly, his voice was not as powerful as it once used to be. Michael held his father's hand and nodded, deciding to stay strong in his father's final moments. "Come closer, I must tell you something before I leave this realm," God told Michael urgently. The seraph nodded and moved closer to his father. God whispered a few words to his son, although Gabriel could not tell what her father was telling Michael, she would ask her brother at a later time. "Can you do that for me, Michael?" asked God with a small smile. Michael smiled and tears began flowing out of his eyes. "Absolutely," reassured Michael. God's smile grew wider at this, and his eyes began to slowly shut close. Gabriel's crying only increased in volume as she witnessed her father accept his doomed fate. She covered her mouth with her hand, but her mumbled cries echoed around the throne room. Michael grit his teeth and he held his father's hand tighter. A few moments passed before God's eyes were fully closed and his heart ceased to beat. Michael's bangs were covering his eyes, while Gabriel fell on her knees crying her heart out. Michael slowly put his father back down, but he refused to let go of his hand. "Father TCH." Michael grit his teeth as he held his father's hand with both of his, and his tears dropped to the reflective white floor. Footsteps could soon be heard from outside the throne room, and the rest of the seraphs could be seen approaching the throne room. Uriel, Raphael, Metatron and the other seraphs eventually arrived at the throne room. Many shocked gasps escaped their mouths, and a few of them had fallen to their knees in shock and sorrow. Raphael bit his lower lip and approached his father's corpse. The blonde seraph kneeled down right beside his father and began praying silently. Uriel had not broken down like the others, but his clenched fists were proof of his anger. Michael eventually let go of his father's hand after a few minutes, while the other seraphs had already left the throne room to grieve and prevent the rest of the angels from finding out about God's death, as the revelation of such knowledge would cause too much chaos. The only ones left in the room were Michael, Gabriel, Uriel and Raphael, the four great seraphs. "Brothers and sister, we must hasten forth to the sacred chambers," urged Michael. Gabriel looked to her brother donning a confused expression. "Are we not forbidden to enter those chambers without our father's approval?" inquired Gabriel, tilting her head slightly. "She is right, you would dare defy our father after his passing?" inquired Uriel, his voice threatening. Raphael sighed at his brother's daring attitude, but decided to keep quiet. "Of course not, father passed on to me a special task before he passed away," Michael told the others, remembering what his father had whispered to him earlier. Flashback. "Come closer, I must tell you something before I leave this realm," God told Michael urgently. The seraph nodded and moved closer to his father. "Once I pass away, gather the four great seraphs and lead them to the sacred chambers," God told Michael. His eyes quivered slightly at the sudden task. "Within those chambers you will find the one who will succeed me, the one who will lead the angels into the bright future," informed God. Michael was intrigued by his father's words. Who could possibly succeed his father, the seraph thought with a hint of curiosity. "Find him, teach him our ways, train him to become a powerful leader. And in due time, he will bring all of you the happiness you deserve, so take good care of him, okay?" requested God as a smile began to form on his face. "Can you do that for me, Michael?" asked God with a small smile. Michael smiled and tears began flowing out of his eyes. "Absolutely," reassured Michael. God's smile grew wider at this, and his eyes began to slowly shut close. Flashback end. "Sounds a bit exaggerated," huffed Uriel, crossing his arms in doubt. A small frown formed on Michael's face at the distrust his brother showed him. "But if our father truly told you this, then let us make haste," Michael smiling as his brother said this. "Follow me." Uriel and Gabriel were the first to follow, while Raphael took one last glance at his father, who was slowly dissipating in golden holy particles before following suit. He had been wondering what happened to the four devil kings. They must have dematerialized before they arrived. The four great seraphs headed towards the sacred chambers, which were usually locked with incredibly powerful magical chains and locks. To the surprise of the seraphs though, the locks were unlocked now. "They're unlocked," remarked Raphael with surprise. Uriel stepped forward and picked up one of the chains which had been unlocked and had been lying on the floor. "Father must have set up some sort of death switch," mused Uriel, inspecting the chains. "Death switch?" Gabriel repeated in confusion. Uriel is saying that father set up a system in which it automatically unlocks the chains to the sacred chambers immediately upon his death, explained Michael, Gabriel humming in interest after hearing her brother's explanation. "Anyway, I believe it's time to find out what father was hiding behind these locks." Uriel nodded and pulled open the heavy door to the chamber. Michael was the first to enter the chambers, Gabriel followed shortly after. Inside were four candles lit up on both sides. The recurring white and gold architecture from the outside of the chambers still remained within the chambers. However, what surprised Michael was the appearance of another door blocking the path. The sealed door had a barrier protecting it which would have prevented entry from devils, fallen angels and anything that wasn't an angel. Uriel and Raphael had soon walked in and were baffled at the sight of another seal. "Is this a joke?" groaned Uriel, smacking his face onto his palm in annoyance. "Don't complain yet, look." Michael pointed towards what appeared to be four locks keeping the door sealed. The locks appeared to be connected to tablets which required specific palm scans for each one. "One for each great seraph," concluded Raphael. Uriel abruptly turned to him in a surprised manner. "So father made sure that only we four could ever enter these chambers. God never ceases to amaze," remarked Michael with a bright smile as he placed his palm within the tablet, which perfectly fit the structure of his palm. Gabriel mimicked her brother and placed her hand on the tablet which resembled her palm. Uriel and Raphael eventually did the same. A loud trumpet-like sound echoed throughout the entirety of heaven as the door opened for the four great seraphs. After the door had fully opened, Michael and the other three seraphs found a golden crib in between a few more lit candles and a chandelier on the ceiling. Michael, Uriel and Raphael were baffled. The crib looked like it belonged to a child. Surely the one who would supposedly surpass God was not still a child, was what the three male seraphs were thinking. However, Gabriel was merely stunned for a moment before racing over to the crib in excitement. The female seraph soon squealed in excitement as she soon saw the one within the crib. Michael gulped and slowly walked over to her sister, who was picking up something from the crib. Gabriel had grabbed the entity within the crib and turned around to her brothers. Michael's eyes widened in shock at what she was holding. Raphael laughed awkwardly and Uriel stepped back unconsciously. "Uaa!" A loud cry echoed throughout the chambers. Gabriel shushed the source of the crying by swaying her body softly, humming softly to the one she held to her chest. "The one that would surpass God is a mere child." A child indeed, the one within the crib was a small, fragile but beautiful child. Michael eventually recovered from his shock and laughed happily as he approached his sister and took a closer look at the child. The youngling possessed pale blonde hair, innocent golden eyes and a smile that could melt the hearts of the seraphs. Gabriel was blushing at the cuteness of the young boy and snuggled him close to her chest. Michael leaned closer to the child. The youngling looked at Michael in a clueless manner before laughing happily and clapping his hands cutely. Gabriel giggled at the display in front of her while Michael laughed softly. Raphael approached the child and poked his nose. The youngling sneezed softly before laughing out loud. Michael and Raphael laughed at this before turning to their brother, who was still a distance away from the child. "Don't you want to see the child, Uriel?" asked Raphael encouragingly. Uriel didn't reply, but instead slowly walked towards the child. The youngling had ceased in its laughter and stared at Uriel with a blank expression. The black void which served as the seraph's face did not allow the child to completely see his expression. Uriel soon arrived right beside his brother, Raphael, and stared at Gabriel's chest where the child was resting. "Make sure not to do that too often, or we risk the child falling," spoke Uriel after a few moments of silence. Gabriel was clueless as to what her brother had meant, but her brothers knew exactly what Uriel was talking about and had laughed about it. After the laughter eventually died down, they noticed the child was still staring at Uriel with a blank expression, the child humming actively and reaching out towards Uriel's hood. Soon after witnessing this, Gabriel had figured out what the child was trying to do. "He hasn't reacted to you because he hasn't seen your face." "You're right, that must be it," agreed Raphael before smacking Uriel's back. "Show him your face. After all, if he is to be the successor of God, then he must know what all of his great seraphs look like," encouraged Raphael. Uriel stared at his brother with a shocked expression before eventually sighing and looking back at the youngling. "Are we sure this boy is to be our savior?" Questioned Uriel, staring at the child intensely, the youngling not reacting at all to the dark void staring him down. Michael smiled and nodded as he went beside Uriel. Father told me that we would find the one who would lead us to our future within these chambers. And this boy has such a powerful holy aura that it already nearly matches ours. Replied Michael. Uriel glanced at his brother before groaning as his hand slowly reached up to his hood. Michael and Raphael stepped back as their brother slowly pulled down his hood. The darkness slowly faded away as the hood was pulled down. And soon enough, the true face of Uriel the Great Seraph would be revealed to the future leader of the angels. His face was that of a handsome man with a few small scars surrounding his facial features. His right eye was blinded as a scar could be seen over it. Uriel also had bright orange eyes and blonde spiky hair slanted backwards. The child stared at the naked face of Uriel and clapped his hands before laughing. Gabriel and Michael smiled at the child's positivity and acceptance of Uriel, while Raphael was chuckling softly right behind his brother. Uriel stared at the child, laughing at him in surprise, but soon enough, a small smile appeared on his face. Michael laughed and grabbed his brother's shoulder approvingly. "I think he likes you," remarked Michael. Uriel chuckled softly at that. "Maybe so," mused Uriel as he stared at the child in front of him. "Let us show him to the others," suggested Gabriel excitedly as she started to walk past her brothers, but a large armored hand stopped her from going too far. She turned behind her in confusion as Uriel was holding onto her shoulder. "Sister, we must not be too hasty here," said Uriel, Raphael nodding in agreement beside him. Gabriel arched an eyebrow and turned her around to face her brothers. "What do you mean, Uriel?" asked Gabriel, confused. Uriel let go of her shoulder and pulled his hood back up, the void returning to block others from seeing his expressions. "We don't know if there are any potential future fallen angels within our current ranks or spies," said Michael, stepping forward. "He's right, sister. We should keep him a secret for a while, at least until he is powerful enough to defend himself," agreed Raphael, crossing his arms. Gabriel pouted at her brother's words, the child within her arms mimicking her expressions and pouting as well. "Very well," surrendered Gabriel, handing the child over to Michael, who carefully extracted the child from his sister. "Don't worry, sister. Soon enough our faction will meet their future leader," reassured Michael, Gabriel smiling in satisfaction at his words. "Then let's hurry up and raise him already," said Gabriel humorously. Her brothers laughed at her words and soon walked out of the chambers. As the seraphs exited the chambers and assigned Uriel with hiding the child for now, the doors to the chambers suddenly closed and a new barrier had formed. "What happened to it?" asked Gabriel, confused as she turned to her brothers. Michael held his chin in deep thought while Raphael approached the barrier, which didn't turn out too well as when he touched the barrier, he was sent crashing into the walls. "It seems to be reacting violently to whatever disturbs the barrier. But from what I can see, it seems to be constructing something within," mused Michael before turning around and helping his brother up. "Raphael, help Uriel find a place for the young child," Michael told his brother before leaving the vicinity with his sister. Raphael scratched his head and sighed as he nodded and went to find Uriel. Gabriel and Michael had soon reunited with their fellow seraphs and had discussed the importance of keeping their father's death a secret. However, such an important piece of information could not be kept hidden for long. Eventually, the death of God would be known to the Grigori, the leaders of the fallen angel faction. And a few ultimate-class devils who seemed to now be having a civil war for the rights to become Mao. The seraphs had hoped that the leaders of the other opposing factions would see how the death of God would hurt the human race if it were to be revealed and the world in general, so they trusted them with at least that much. A few years would pass, and eventually the biblical factions would calm down a bit. Heaven was calm now, and Michael was elected as the temporary leader of heaven. Although he wasn't his father, he was doing a fine job at handling the faith of those around the world. Azazel, the governor-general of the fallen angels, was doing fine with his faction himself. Fallen angels were passive for the moment, although one of the Grigori members was quite disappointed with the fact that the war was now over. And finally, devils. They were in the most trouble right now, after new leaders were elected and the original descendants of the original Mao were denied their places as Maos. The angry descendants created the old Mao faction, which would go to war against the new leaders. But those weren't within the concerns of Michael right now. He would leave the other two factions with themselves for the next few years. His greatest concern was the child they had found at the sacred chambers around 3 years ago. The child had been named Archon. And surprisingly, it was Uriel who had come up with the name. They had all agreed on the name of Archon as they felt that it had a powerful heavenly sound to it. Archon was still a bit young, but Gabriel was already teaching him how to speak and also some basic lessons taught to kids in human kindergarten. Raphael assisted in strengthening the boy's holy aura, but he wouldn't be able to extend his own training any further until Archon aged more. Uriel's training was definitely going to be utilized only when Archon was powerful enough to sustain his own aura. The Seraphs didn't want the angel to kill the boy after all. Although Uriel insisted that he would be careful, they weren't convinced when he declared the Dragon Slayer, Ascalon, as his supposed training sword. Michael's training would consist of light weaponry and leadership, but he still needed to wait a few years for his training to be put into actual use. So he had worked on his duties in the meantime. But he was surely excited to finally train Archon, the future leader of the angels. Archon was now 10 years old and was currently taking on Uriel's training regiment. Archon had grown a lot during the past 7 years, his body had become leaner and more fit, so much that it would be easy to mistake him for a well-trained 15-year-old in his current state. Uriel's training consisted of lifting, boxing, and a bunch of other workout activities that normal humans do as well, except it was tuned up to an intense level with Archon. Instead of a punching bag, Archon would be punching entire columns. And lifting massive boulders instead of weights. Of course Archon's swordsmanship had been trained by Uriel as well. Michael urged him to focus on Archon's martial arts and weapon training, but Uriel wanted Archon's body to get stronger before any of that. Uriel watched as Archon continuously pounded a magically reinforced column. The column was slowly getting decimated with every punch Archon threw. But Uriel's thoughts weren't focused on his students' training. But instead on the abnormality of Archon's holy nature. Archon was no doubt an angel, but his wings were incredibly different from the others. His wings were not covered in pure white feathers, instead his wings were entirely made up of fiery energy. When Raphael had attempted to touch Archon's strange wings, a burst of holy energy released from Archon, sending all 4 of the great seraphs flying backwards. After that incident, all of them decided to leave Archon's wings alone. But this abnormality also gave Archon a certain trait, which is immunity to sin. Archon was made to be perfectly pure and immune to all types of sin, and while some of Archon's actions could be considered sins, his natural trait prevented him from actually falling from grace. Archon could wipe out an entire village of innocent people, and he would still be technically sinless and pure. God simply made him this way, and the 4 great seraphs had eventually accepted that fact over time. Uriel was driven away from his thoughts as wings made of pure energy flapped, and Archon was now flying towards him. The seraph slowly descended from the sky to speak with his pupil. "I think I'm finished for today, Uriel," Archon told his teacher, panting tiredly. Uriel nodded and opened a portal back to heaven. "Go rest up in your room and wait for Michael," said Uriel. Archon nodded and entered the portal. Archon had proceeded to return to his room, as ordered by Uriel. Once he had gotten to his room, which was the former location of the sacred chambers, he had taken a nice quick bath to refresh himself and prepare for Michael's lessons. After a few minutes of waiting, Archon could feel someone pass through the barrier surrounding his room, which only the seraphs could pass through. 10 years ago, after the 4 great seraphs exited the sacred chambers, the door had sealed itself and began constructing what turned out to be Archon's room. God had truly prepared everything for his supposed successor, and the seraphs had praised him for it. He had saved them the effort of finding Archon his own room, but they had all agreed to keep him out of Gabriel's room, even before they had found out about the room their father had built, for certain reasons. Archon turned to his room's door as he heard the sound of knocking. Archon allowed them passage and the door had opened. Michael was the one to enter, and he seemed to be carrying a few books under his left arm. "Archon, are you ready for today's training?" asked Michael as he set down the books on Archon's desk. Archon nodded excitedly as he leaped from his excessively large bed and sat down right beside Michael. "Alright, so for today we will be practicing the creation of light weapons again," informed Michael, creating a light spear of high caliber. Archon was surprised as this was the first time Michael had shown him a light spear with this much power. "Your training with Uriel and Raphael should allow you to make light spears with this amount of power. You have learned from their training sessions, right?" inquired Michael, to which Archon nodded and opened his palm. He focused his energy onto his palm, and his aura flickered for a moment before a light spear came to life within Archon's palm. Michael inspected the light spear for a moment, but soon shook his head in disapproval. "Archon, you need to concentrate your energy more, imagine a spear and focus your energy on creating it," said Michael, watching as Archon closed his eyes and concentrated his energy as he was told to. Archon began sweating slightly as he pictured a spear of pure fiction, made in his creative mind. He imagined a spear of pure shining gold, a spear which could wipe out entire armies, and a spear which could fire holy flames. "Focus my energy and then..." Ooh. Archon's eyes shot wide open as he focused his energy and created a light spear, or so he thought he had created a light spear. Archon raised his head and looked at Michael, whose eyes were wide open in shock. The successor of God noticed Michael staring at what Archon believed was a light spear in his hand. However, when Archon looked down and saw what he was holding, his eyes soon widened in shock as well. He was indeed holding a spear, and it certainly emitted a holy aura, a powerful one even. But what surprised Archon, and probably shocked Michael as well, was that it wasn't any ordinary light spear. It was an actual spear made out of pure gold, and it also took solid form, not energy like the light spears. How? Asked Michael in awe. Archon gulped and inspected the spear. He couldn't believe that he had somehow created a spear made within his own mind. In order to find out if it was the true spear, Archon stood up and pointed the spear at his large bed. In his dreams, this spear which he now held could fire holy flames and decimate entire armies. If the spear he held could do that as well, then it was the real deal. He mimicked his actions in his dreams, first slowly raising the spear with his right hand. And then slightly pulling back before lunging the spear forward with a tightened grip. And much to Archon's and Michael's shock, the spear actually fired holy flames. Archon's bed was decimated. And had it not been for the powerful barrier protecting the room, everything else within might have been destroyed as well. Archon quickly pulled the spear back, and the spear ceased fire. Michael was at a loss for words after seeing Archon's spear. He slowly regained his composure eventually and was quick to call the other great seraphs into the room. "Archon, do you know what you have just done?" asked Michael, a small amount of surprise still present in his voice. Archon turned around and nervously looked at Michael, a nervous smile present on his face. "I created a light spear," replied Archon, not convinced with his own answer. Michael shook his head and approached Archon, grabbing both of his shoulders with his hands. Michael looked Archon straight in the eyes, which caused the young angel to gulp nervously. "Not just any light spear, Archon, you made a holy spear, one which takes physical form," corrected Michael before smiling proudly. Michael let go of Archon's shoulders and stepped backwards, crossing his arms as he inspected the spear. "It seems to have a very powerful holy signature, and from what you just did with it, I dare say it could rival Excalibur," remarked Michael, surprising Archon at the estimation of his spear's strength. The door to the room opened and the three other great seraphs rushed in. Uriel wielded Ascalon and prepared for a battle, Raphael's aura was flaring, and Gabriel had prepared some herbs to heal Archon in the unlikely event that he was injured. But when they saw that Archon was fine, they calmed down and approached Michael. Archon stepped back a bit and tried to hide his spear, but it was so long that it looked comical when Archon whistled and hid the spear behind him. "What happened here?" asked Uriel, pointing at the remains of Archon's bed, which surprisingly seemed to be rebuilding itself. "God's handiwork," the five of them thought as they watched the bed piece itself back together, parts of the bed which had been disintegrated, seemingly popping out of thin air. "Well, as you can see, Archon has just done the impossible," replied Michael, referring to Archon's spear, which the young angel was now holding to his side, after realizing how pointless his attempts to hide it were. "I don't understand," muttered Gabriel, confused as she looked at Archon's spear, which certainly held a powerful aura, but she thought that her brother simply lent Archon a holy spear. He created that spear out of his own imagination. His attempt at creating a high-level light spear resulted in this ultimate-class weapon, informed Michael, Gabriel and Raphael gasping in surprise, while Uriel simply stared at the spear in interest. "Is it true, Archon?" asked Raphael with a newfound sparkle in his eyes as he inspected the spear. Archon hesitantly nodded and raised the spear for them to see. Gabriel and Raphael took a closer look, while Uriel tugged Michael's sides. "What is it, brother?" asked Michael quietly. Uriel gestured for them to move back a bit from the others. The two siblings went over to the door and stood just right next to it. "Archon's spear, I sense great power from it. Do you think he should be wielding it at this age?" asked Uriel, worried for his pupil. Michael smiled and nodded before looking towards the others. He spotted Raphael inspecting the spear closely, while Gabriel was interrogating Archon. "He created the spear from his own imagination. He also appears to know how to use it from what I've seen. I'm confident in his ability to control this newfound power. And I believe we should also focus his training with you now. I only need to teach him how to make balanced light spears." "So you finally realize that my training is the best for him?" huffed Uriel proudly. Michael laughed as Uriel said this. "Well, I certainly can't deny that. We should probably speak to Gabriel about his education as well. I'm thinking we could enroll him somewhere in the human world," said Michael, Uriel scoffing as he heard this. "That's quite foolish. I don't understand why Archon would require education from humans when we have many capable angels here in heaven." Michael thought about it for a second, but eventually gave up on the idea and returned to the others, Uriel trailing him from behind. When they returned, they could see Raphael had taken the spear and had started testing it out, while Gabriel was still chatting with Archon. "Oh, brother. Archon and I were just speaking about the name of the spear," called out Gabriel as she noticed her brother's return from their chat. Michael nodded and looked at Archon with a smile. "And have you decided on it?" asked Michael curiously. Archon nodded and raised his hand, the spear in Raphael's hands fading into golden particles and reappearing in Archon's hands. "Solarian. Good, keep it steady," instructed Uriel, his arms crossed as he watched Archon attempt to create multiple weapons at once. While Solarian was still Archon's greatest weapon, that didn't mean that he couldn't try other weapons as well. 5 years had passed since the discovery of Archon's ability to create any weapon using the combination of his holy aura and imagination. Uriel was left in charge of training Archon's special abilities and his physical state. Michael's lessons had finished a few years ago, and so had Raphael's, leaving only Uriel's training left to complete. Archon has been doing a fine job with Uriel's training regiment and has completely mastered most of the necessary talents required to rule over heaven. Uriel watched as Archon created multiple swords and fired them at the endless abyss of the pure white training room. The training room was like a void, endless, perfect for training the future leader of the angel faction. "How was that?" asked Archon, falling on his knees panting slightly. Uriel gave a nod of satisfaction and offered Archon his hand, which the young man gladly took. Uriel pulled him up and headed towards the exit of the training room. "Our training sessions will come to a stop in a year or two. After that, you will finally be introduced to the rest of the supernatural world," informed Uriel with a serious tone. Archon nodded and followed his teacher. Archon wiped some sweat off his forehead as he caught up to his teacher. The two soon exited the training room and proceeded to Archon's room. The former location of the sacred chambers was located in the 7th floor of heaven, the same floor where the 4 great seraphs resided. As the duo entered the room, Archon dematerialized his armor, which was forged by Hephaestus. Gabriel and Raphael had apparently requested that the god of blacksmiths forge the best armor he could make with the holy metal supply of the church. This resulted in the Greek pantheon demanding that the angel faction owed them a debt that would be paid when they brought it up again, to which Gabriel reluctantly agreed to. To this day, Archon still can't figure out why they had done what they did. Uriel leaned on the door as he watched Archon undress himself. He had to admit, he was impressed by how much his pupil had grown over the years. Archon's white blonde hair had grown a bit and had become a bit more spiky. His eyes were the same gold color, his body was more defined, and his muscles were toned. Archon also had a six-pack to boast about and a sharp handsome face trademarked with his signature grin. Archon's height had also grown a bit, he was now standing at around 6'5", just barely smaller than Uriel and Michael, who stood at 6'9" and 7'1". After undressing himself, he was left in nothing but his trousers. He looked at Uriel expectantly, signaling that he wanted the hooded angel to give him some privacy. Uriel huffed and left the room, giving Archon time to take a bath. The young man sighed as Uriel had closed the door to his room, and he soon proceeded to the bathroom. He decided that he needed a quick bath after today's training. As the abnormal angel was taking a bath, however, there were 2 low-class angels not too far from his room. They were quite the curious bunch. One of the angels had black hair and blue eyes, while the other had blonde hair styled into twintails and a gothic Lolita outfit. "Raynare, we really shouldn't be here," urged the blonde angel with twintails. The other angel, her name revealed as Raynare, simply ignored her companion and quietly walked over to the sacred chambers. The blonde-haired twintail hesitantly followed her senior. Raynare had suggested that they investigate the mysteries behind the sacred chambers. Most of the low-level angels had been gossiping that there was some top-secret project behind the closed room. "Imagine how much we'll be praised if we actually find out what Michael Sama and the other seraphs have been hiding," said Raynare with an excited expression covering her face as she examined the barrier protecting the sacred chambers. "But if we get caught, then we'll be kicked out of heaven for sure," exclaimed the blonde-haired twintail. Raynare scoffed and looked at her companion with a serious expression. "Middled, at best we'll be confined in the 2nd floor for a few days. I doubt they'll actually kick us out of heaven for such a small thing," said Raynare, turning back to the barrier and coming up with a conclusion. "From what Selena Sama has taught us about barriers, this one is specifically set so that only seraphs can enter, judging by the aura this barrier is emitting," concluded Raynare, the one called Middled humming in interest. "Then I guess we won't be able to enter. Come on, let's get out of here," suggested Middled, turning around getting ready to leave the floor. Raynare stopped her by pulling her back and suddenly raising her aura. "What are you doing?" asked Middled in confusion as she felt Raynare connect her aura with hers. "Selena Sama taught me how to bind our auras together. It strengthens both of our auras by making them one," replied Raynare, pulling both of their hands into the barrier. Middled and Raynare were shocked when both of their hands managed to get inside of the barrier. Their wings flickered slightly, but they were too shocked to notice it. 2 small portals appeared for a very short time beneath the 2, but they didn't notice that either. Raynare was amazed that both her aura and Middled's combined could actually fool the barrier into thinking they were seraphs. This caused some unnecessary arrogance to build up within her. The black-haired angel grinned as she leaped into the barrier, pulling Middled along with her. The 2 angels smiled in success and celebrated for a short time before turning their attention to the door that was now within their reach. Raynare reached towards the door with her hand, but suddenly she felt like she couldn't move. Middled tried to move as well, but soon found out that she was rendered immobile as well. Middle started to panic and thrashed her body around in an attempt to free herself from whatever held her. Raynare tried as well but gave up after realizing that whatever was holding them wasn't going to let go anytime soon. The blonde-haired twintail stopped thrashing around eventually and looked up at her senior for some assistance, but her eyes widened in shock as she laid her eyes upon Raynare. Raynare arched an eyebrow at Middle's wide-eyed expression towards her. She was going to ask what her problem was until the blackening of Middle's wings shut her up completely. She now realized why Middle was so shocked upon seeing her. "Raynare, your eyes, your wings," mumbled out Middle in complete and utter shock. Raynare had a horrified expression on her face as she now saw her black angel wings. "We fell," muttered Raynare in despair. How could this happen, she thought in desperation. Middle started tearing up, her wet tears dropping down on the white floor. Raynare was on the verge of breaking down as well, but she tried to stay strong for her junior angel. Two portals suddenly opened up beneath the two of them, the duo sinking into the portals slowly. Middle cried out loud, begging for God to forgive her for her insubordination. While Raynare turned to the door that ultimately caused them to fall from grace. Raynare glared at the door in hatred as she kept sinking into the portal. She would soon fall from the sky with her companion, Middle. "Whatever or whoever is within that door, I damn you to hell," screamed Raynare in her mind, tears beginning to flow out of her eyes. And thus the duo fell from heaven forever and became fallen angels. The door that the duo desperately tried to explore suddenly burst open, Archon managing to catch the two portals closing before completely disappearing. Archon was shocked to say the least. He had felt two angels just fall right out of his doorstep. But he had other questions in mind. How did the two get past the barrier, and why did they even try? These were just some of the questions filling up Archon's confused mind right now. He soon heard multiple footsteps headed right towards him. Archon narrowed his eyes and found out that Metatron, Sandalphon and Michael were coming. Archon materialized his full armor excluding the helmet to appear professional in front of the Seraphs. The two Seraphs and Archangel had arrived just outside of Archon's room, the golden armored angel walking out of the barrier protecting his room with his spear Solarian in hand. "Archon, what has transpired here?" asked Michael, a concerned voice coming out of his mouth as he uttered those words. Archon glanced behind him for a moment before shrugging in a clueless manner. "All I know is that two angels fell from grace right there, and from what I could tell they were low class," replied Archon, Metatron walking past him and inspecting the barrier for any faults. "Is the barrier malfunctioning?" asked Sandalphon, crossing his arms awaiting an answer. Metatron hummed and scanned the barrier, but was surprised when he found that it was completely fine. "There were no signs of malfunction, whoever entered the barrier had guised themselves as Seraphs," replied Metatron, turning around and walking back to his brothers. Michael was surprised when he heard this. "What? That's preposterous," exclaimed Sandalphon, slightly irritated at the suggestion that one of their angels would attempt to guise themselves as them. "It's the only explanation," said Metatron with a stern voice. "Archon, please tell us exactly what you felt happened here," requested Michael, Archon nodding and turning to his room. "I was dressing up and preparing myself for a few thousand push-ups until I felt someone bind their auras together with another angel," said Archon, crossing his arms. "And then I felt them enter the barrier. After that I rushed to investigate, but I only managed to catch two portals closing," continued Archon, Sandalphon holding his chin in deep thought as he took in Archon's story. "Two portals, it must have been the system ejecting them from heaven," concluded Metatron, Michael nodding in agreement. "The process of ejecting recently corrupted angels should have taken around 2 minutes at the most. May I ask what took you so long to reach for the door?" asked Michael, arching an eyebrow. Archon laughed awkwardly, scratching his head in embarrassment. "Well, you see, when I prepare for a few thousand push-ups I always create multiple metal slabs and stack them on top of me to intensify the exercise," replied Archon, Michael slamming his face into his palm. "We'll deal with this matter, no need to work yourself up over this," said Michael. Archon nodded and returned to his room. Metatron and Sandalphon were discussing the possible methods for low-class angels to bypass the barrier, but soon followed Michael back to their meeting room. Michael had called out to all the Seraphs and gathered them at their meeting room, where a massive round table lay in the middle of the room. Michael sat down right between Uriel and Gabriel, while Raphael was sitting on Gabriel's right. Metatron and Sandalphon were on Uriel's left, Rigel and Sariel on Metatron's left, and Remiel and Raziel in between Sariel and Raphael. Thus, all of the Seraphs had been gathered in the meeting room. "Michael, what was so important that you had to gather us all on such short notice?" asked Sariel, curiosity tainting his tone. The other Seraphs turned their attention to Michael, all of them just as curious as Sariel. Michael looked at Metatron and nodded his head. Metatron returned the nod and stood up from his seat, gaining the attention of everyone on the round table. "Two angels fell approximately half an hour ago," informed Metatron, a few of the Seraphs mumbling in confusion. "Is that what called this emergency meeting?" asked Remiel impatiently. No, it was the location of the incident that garners our attention. Replied Sandalphon, his arms crossed as he leaned on his seat. The location. Repeated Gabriel in confusion. Yes, the incident took place not 5 feet from Archon's doorstep. Said Metatron, a majority of the seraphs donning shocked expressions. The barrier was bypassed, exclaimed Raynare in shock. Indeed, I felt 2 angels enter the barrier, so I rushed there immediately with Metatron and Sandalphon. When we arrived we found Archon in full armor standing just outside his room. Said Michael. Is Archon hurt? Exclaimed Gabriel, Michael slightly surprised at his sister's outburst. No, he is fine, sister. He was the one who informed us of the 2 angels falling. Reassured Michael, Gabriel sighing in relief and leaning back on her seat. He also told us that he felt the binding of 2 auras before the incident occurred. This leads us to believe that the angels who fell were most likely pupils of high-class angel, Selena Arisanya. Said Metatron, gaining the attention of the seraphs. Selena, you mean the one the low classes call Monarch? Asked Raziel, Metatron nodding in confirmation. Someone seriously needs to ban her from the first floor. Groaned Rigel, eliciting some chuckles from some of his brothers. Selena specializes in aura binding and is known for her motherly love towards the low classes. I had heard from one of my troops that she had begun taking a few low-class angels as her pupils. Said Michael, gaining understanding nods from the others. So this aura binding technique allows a pair of angels mimic the aura of a seraph for a few minutes? Inquired Raphael, receiving a nod from Michael. Apparently so, we will have Selena seize all her lessons to prevent any more incidents like this in the future. Said Michael, getting nods of approval from the rest. But this brings us to another topic, muttered Michael, holding his chin. Gabriel tilted her head in curiosity, while the others simply awaited the reveal of the next topic. Should we reveal Archon to the supernatural world now? Asked Michael, a serious shine in his eyes. The other seraphs' jaws hanged wide open in shock, they certainly didn't expect this question for a few more years. Denied, my training with him isn't finished. Replied Uriel, speaking for the first time since arriving in this room. Gabriel instantly agreed with Uriel, while the others were still thinking about their answer. In my opinion, Archon is already powerful enough, with his spear and armor, he can pretty much beat just about anyone in this room. Voiced out Raphael, getting a glare from Gabriel that he'd never expected. I agree, I believe we should reveal him already. Agreed Raynare, Michael nodding in acceptance to his answer. He glanced around the table, waiting for the answers of his brothers. I disagree. In his current state he would lose to Syzygus in his true form. Said Sandalphon, Metatron nodding his head in agreement. What makes you so confident that Syzygus' true form can even beat Archon? Asked Raynare baffled. Haven't you heard? His true form places him in the top 10 strongest. Replied Sandalphon, Raynare scoffing and crossing his arms. Have you seen Solarian? That spear can wipe out an entire country in seconds. Argued Raynare, Sandalphon clenching his fist in annoyance. Even so we can't just assume Archon can beat anyone that stands in his way. Said Metatron, Raynare scoffed and simply leaned back on his chair. Sandalphon sighed and leaned back on his chair as well. In any case, I believe that he is prepared to rule heaven. Spoke Raziel, Rigel nodding in agreement. Gabriel frowned as her brothers were leaning towards revealing Archon early. I also think that he should be revealed now. Said Sariel, counting as the final vote. Michael sighed as the votes were in favor of revealing Archon. He was about to stand up until he saw Uriel stand up first. Unacceptable, I already said his training isn't finished. Said Uriel, Raynare scowling and standing up. The votes are in our favor. It's 5 against 4. Argued Raynare, Uriel huffed and turned away from him, angering the seraph. All you talk about is training Archon, is that seriously all you can talk about? Inquired Raynare with a slight bit of malice. Do you have something to say, Raynare? Asked Uriel threateningly, Raynare scoffing in response. I don't care about your votes, he will not be revealed until his training is complete. Declared Uriel, Sariel frowning at his brother's defiance. Brother, this is preposterous, please stop this at once. Pleaded Sariel, but was shot down when a dark void glared at him. I'm sorry, Uriel, but we must follow our own rules. Said Michael, Uriel turning to his brother in disbelief. Sacrilege. You would give Archon a burden he is not prepared to carry, exclaimed Uriel, Michael frowning at those words. Arguments began to fill the room and it wouldn't be long before a fight would ensue. But before it could go that far, a bright light shined in between the round table, gathering the attention of everyone in the room. The bright light soon dissipated and revealed Archon in his full armor, Solarian resting within his right hand. Some of the seraphs gulped as they felt a threatening aura emitting from their future leader. Don't think for a moment that you can decide my fate with measly votes. Exclaimed Archon, his voice sounding more supreme and commanding, a voice favored by valor. Hey Archon, how did you know about our discussion? Asked Sariel, curiosity and intimidation filling his voice. I created the spear of the shining heaven, do you think I cannot eavesdrop on a meeting? Inquired Archon, serial gulping and leaning back on his chair. The law set by our father strictly forbids us from playing with others' lives, yet you have done so, brazenly. Declared Archon, the seraphs lowering their heads in shame. Archon looked around the room, seeing the contemplating expressions of his fellow angels, he smiled underneath his helmet which completely rejected all side of his expressions, similarly to Uriel's hood. He raised his spear and pierced the middle of the round table with it, shaking the entire room and surprising the seraphs. Archon held his breath as he slowly let go of the spear which he impaled the table with. Am I not the successor of God? Do I not have the right to decide my own fate? Inquired Archon, receiving no negative response from the seraphs. Michael sat on seat and smiled proudly at Archon. From this day forth I will decide my own fate, but you needn't worry, I will rule heaven as my father envisioned. Declared Archon, the seraph smiling and accepting Archon's declaration. Pardon me, my lord. But when will you decide to reveal yourself to the others? Asked Rigel. Archon turned to him and looked down at the table for a moment. I cannot say for sure, but when I do take up the throne, I will be ready. Replied Archon, Rigel giving a nod in acceptance to his answer. Then shall we call this meeting over? Asked Raphael, Michael nodding in confirmation. I believe our future leader has said all that he has needed to say. Replied Michael, looking at Archon to search for any disagreement, he smiled when Archon simply gave him a nod. Dismissed. Declared Michael, the seraphs soon leaving the room one by one. The only ones left were the four great seraphs and Archon. Once the final seraph left the room, leaving the five of them alone, Gabriel sprung herself towards Archon. You did amazingly, Archon. Complimented Gabriel, hugging Archon tightly. Archon gasped for air as his armor dematerialized and he was caught in a trap by Gabriel's beach balls. Uriel crossed his arms and leaned on the wall, watching the event in amusement. Raphael laughed and went right beside Michael, who was also watching the scene quite amused himself. His eyes soon lingered to the spear still stuck in the middle of the table, a tired smile made its way onto his face as he leaned back on his seat. Archon's training will be complete soon, so that only leaves school. You cannot be serious. Exclaimed Archon donning a wide-eyed expression. Michael and Gabriel sighed in unison as Archon certainly wasn't taking what they told him quite well. The duo had informed Archon that they had already made plans for him to attend school, in the human world no less. Once your training with Uriel is over we can enroll you into a prestigious school, and after you graduate you can officially announce your existence to the supernatural world. Said Michael, Archon grit his teeth in slight anger. Didn't I just say that I would decide my own fate? Inquired Archon. Michael and Gabriel glanced at each other worriedly after he said this. Gabriel soon gave Michael a nod and stepped forward, embracing Archon. Whether you want to go to school or not is completely up to you, we are simply suggesting the option. Reassured Gabriel, Archon frowned but gave her an accepting nod before returning the hug. Gabriel smiled as she embraced her beloved Archon. Eventually after the hug broke up, she returned to Michael's side. So what will it be, Archon? Asked Michael donning his bright smile. Archon hummed and held his chin in deep thought. I still need to think about it, I'll come to you when I have my answer. Replied Archon, soon returning to his room after waving the two angels a farewell. Gabriel happily waved back at Archon before turning back to her brother. Do you think he'll accept? Asked Gabriel curiously. Michael turned to his sister and stared at her for a moment before answering. The chances of him declining are higher, but on the off chance that he does accept, then we'll have to make sure that he doesn't regret it. Replied Michael, giving his sister a smile, which she soon returned. Archon walked through the hallways of the 7th floor of heaven with his arms crossed, his mind contemplating on his decision. But as he was walking, he heard the sounds of rushing footsteps, someone was coming his way, and fast. He quickly dashed to his right side where he could hide behind a pillar. He leaned on the white pillar with his back against it, he glanced to his right to see a low-level angel dash past the pillar he was leaning on. Archon sighed and ceased leaning on the pillar, beginning to walk again. A courier, and a young one at that. Thought Archon, slightly glancing behind him where he could still see a shady silhouette of the courier. Before his thoughts could linger further he bumped into a heavily armored angel, one that he recognized very much so. Archon massaged his forehead which had turned slightly red after bumping into the armored breastplate of the angel. I believe I taught you to observe your surroundings. Mused Uriel, who didn't seem fazed at all by the collision. Archon slightly pouted and looked up at his teacher who was only slightly taller than him. I was thinking about something. Retorted Archon. Uriel huffed and grabbed Archon's shoulders, turning him around. What are you doing? Asked Archon confused at his teacher's actions. You're stressed, training will help relieve you of some of it. Replied Uriel, leading Archon to the training room. Archon hesitantly followed the seraph into the training room. Once the duo had arrived, Uriel pulled open the two doors to the training room and entered, with Archon just behind him. Uriel summoned one of his many swords, Ascalon, and pointed it at Archon, who equipped his armor after entering the room. "So what has been troubling you, Archon?" asked Uriel as he dashed towards Archon and slashed at him. Archon swiftly ducked and attempted to kick Uriel's leg to loosen his footing, but Uriel leaped and swung his sword down as he descended from the sky. "Michael and Gabriel," grunted Archon as he blocked Uriel's swing using Solarian. Archon tightened his grip on Solarian and pushed Uriel back, and then following up with a thrust of his spear. Uriel parried the thrust, causing Archon's aim to falter for a moment. Uriel used this opportunity to swing at Archon from the side. Archon saw the swing and quickly impaled the floor with Solarian, Ascalon colliding with the spear soon after. Uriel clicked his tongue and pulled back Ascalon. "What about brother and sister?" asked Uriel before flying up into the sky using his wings. Archon followed Uriel as he flapped his fiery orange energy wings, charging at Uriel with Solarian in hand. Uriel flew to his right, narrowly dodging the attack. Archon spun around and charged up Solarian, the tip of the spear heating up. Uriel saw this and began flying around in an unpredictable manner. Archon aimed the spear at Uriel, he then pulled the spear forward, causing a beam of holy fire to come out of the tip of the spear. The beam followed Uriel relentlessly, but Uriel was fast. "They suggested that I go to school in the human world, but I needed to think about it," replied Archon, still trying to hit Uriel with the beam. The flying angel avoided the beam and was waiting for it to cool down before striking again. "I remember Michael said something about enrolling you into a school a few years back," forced out Uriel as he was more focused on dodging the dangerous beam which seemed to be growing weaker. The beam soon retracted back into the spear, and Uriel quickly charged at Archon, swinging Ascalon at the golden armored angel. Archon's armor was hit, but the sword bounced off of it. Archon flew even higher, with the seraph on his tail. Archon abruptly turned around and created multiple swords around him, firing them all at once. Uriel growled as he deflected the swords that came flying at him, but he couldn't attack in this position. "I'm conflicted, I don't know what to do, if I should accept Michael's suggestion or not," said Archon, conflicted and lost. Uriel understood what Archon was going through, even as he deflected the swords that came his way. Eventually the sword ceased firing at Uriel as creating weapons out of his imagination drained Archon. Uriel took the chance and created a massive light spear. Archon huffed as he saw the light spear, he was going to take it on. Uriel threw the light spear at Archon, who in response created a light shield. Sparks flew everywhere as the two light objects grinded against each other, the spear forcing Archon back a few meters, even with the shield in hand. "I feel that if I accept, it makes me look like a fool who has brawn but no brains," grunted Archon, desperately attempting to ward off the spear. Uriel teleported behind Archon and created a light hammer. "It's a matter of perspective, really," said Uriel before slamming the hammer down on Archon, causing Archon to release a pained roar as his light shield shattered and he crashed into the ground. Uriel quickly caught the light spear he fired earlier and threw it back at Archon, who was trying to quickly get up on his feet. Archon saw the light spear coming his way, and he responded by pointing Solarian at it and firing a beam of holy flames. The light spear shattered immediately upon making contact with Solarian's powerful flames, and the beam was now aiming to hit Uriel, who quickly dodged and began flying towards Archon. Archon retracted the beam and narrowly blocked Ascalon, as it was inches off from Archon's armored chest. Archon deflected Ascalon, causing the sword to fall out of Uriel's hands. Archon then followed up by thrusting Solarian at Uriel, but the seraph was persistent and grabbed the spear. The duo fought for the spear, the two of them spinning around in the sky as they pulled the spear simultaneously. Eventually their spinning was put to a stop when Uriel's back collided with a white wall, the entrance to the training room just below it. The two angels then fell on the ground, with Archon being at the bottom. As the two hit the ground, Archon's grip faltered and Solarian slid away. Archon saw this and forcefully pushed Uriel off of him, he then teleported to his spear, but before he could grab it, the spear was already lifted and pointed at him. Somehow Uriel had moved fast enough to get Solarian first. The seraph gave Archon a nod, signifying that he had won the sparring match. Archon sighed and dematerialized Solarian, the spear in Uriel's hand turning into smoke. "If you ask me, you should accept their offer," said Uriel, Archon surprised at his teacher's words. "I certainly didn't expect that from you of all angels," said Archon before dematerializing his armor. "Going to school, it's something none of us have ever experienced before. It's a one-time thing, so you should enjoy it while it lasts," said Uriel, walking towards the exit to the training room. Archon pondered on Uriel's words carefully, he didn't want to agree to something he would regret. But he also worried about regretting the decision of rejecting Michael's offer of education. "Are you coming?" called out Uriel, who had just opened the door. Archon shook his head and cleared his mind for now, he then jogged over to Uriel, who had been waiting at the exit. The duo soon exited the training room, with Uriel closing the door as Archon got out. The hooded angel then turned his attention to Archon, who looked like he was thinking about something. "Archon, you don't have to stress about it," said Uriel, gaining the attention of Archon. "I know, but I still need to think about what I really want to do." Archon proceeded to walk back to his room. Uriel was contemplating following him, but he was suddenly called into the meeting room by Michael. "Head over to the meeting room, we have some unexpected visitors," called out Michael. Uriel huffed and disconnected the line. He soon proceeded to the meeting room, where they were apparently holding unexpected visitors. Once Archon had gotten back to his room, he sat down on the bed and focused his aura. He closed his eyes to strengthen his mind and create the image he had right now. His holy aura burst for a moment and a golden orb appeared in his hands. Archon smiled as he successfully created an orb which allowed him to monitor the human world. Archon looked into the orb and visuals of schools and students were now being projected within the orb. One of the projections showed students eating together around a table, students laughing together, and students participating in sports. Archon was intrigued by their activities. He thought that if he accepted Michael's offer, he would be the same as these students. Going to school, it's something none of us have ever experienced before. Uriel's words appeared in Archon's mind. If he accepted, he would be the first angel to attend school in the entire history of heaven. Archon sighed tiredly before shaking his head and grinning. He had made up his mind. The successor of God soon jumped off of his bed and headed towards the meeting room, where he sensed Michael's aura. Once he had arrived at the entrance to the meeting room, he attempted to pull the door open, but to his surprise, it was sealed quite tightly. Archon paused as he felt two unique auras within the room. He leaned on the door, eavesdropping on the conversing angels inside. Archon concluded that they were having a meeting with another faction. "You cannot take Archon away from us," exclaimed Gabriel, causing Archon to arch an eyebrow in confusion. "I don't want to take him away from you either, but my father's will is absolute," retorted the newcomer. From what Archon could hear, it was a woman. "Ha! If you hadn't made that deal with our father, then this wouldn't be happening," mocked another newcomer. This time it was a man's voice. Archon frowned as he had finally figured out what was happening. "Ares, please try not to provoke them," stressed the woman, who Archon assumed was a goddess. If Ares, the god of war, was here, then it could only mean one thing. "We've come to claim your debt, that is all," said the goddess. Archon sighed as he knew where this was going. He compassed himself and wore his full armor before briefly kicking the doors open, shocking the ones inside. "Archon!" exclaimed Gabriel, startled by the intrusion. Archon had barged into a meeting of literal gods. After looking around the room, Archon walked towards the two deities sent by the Greek pantheon. He could now see what the two gods looked like. Ares was exactly like he imagined, a seasoned warrior with black armor. While the appearance of the woman completely gave away who she was to Archon. Archon concluded that she was the goddess of wisdom, Athena. This was due to her well-crafted armor and pure white robes, along with the sword resting on her hip. Archon knew that Athena was the only goddess who appeared like this. "Ah, you must be the so-called successor of God," mused Athena, clearly measuring up the golden armored angel. "Looks like Hephaestus really did a good job with the boy's armor," said Ares, grinning like a madman. "I overheard your conversation, and I understand that this is about the deal Gabriel and Raphael made with your faction," spoke Archon, Ares huffing as he heard these words. "Then you know that we have come to claim you as repayment?" inquired Ares, Archon frowning beneath his helmet. "Indeed, but I would like to know what you would do if I refused," said Archon, resulting in Ares chuckling in amusement. "If you refused, then you would know what it's like to fight a god of war," declared Ares, pride overflowing around him. Athena groaned and cast a spell which immediately forced Ares to the ground. "Why, you," grunted Ares, struggling to fight against the gravity spell cast on him. "Please forgive him for his arrogance, but I do know our father only wants to claim you as our repayment for two reasons," spoke Athena, gaining Archon's and the Seraph's attention. "The first reason is to form a positive relationship with the angel faction, and my father concluded that Archon here was the best way to do that," informed Athena, Gabriel frowning as she heard this. "Taking away our father's final creation doesn't sound like a great start," said Gabriel, Athena smiling in amusement. "I suppose not, but I am confident in our capabilities to complete Archon's training and develop good relationships with him. The second reason is because my father wants the successor of God to court the goddess of the hunt," continued Athena, shocking all of the angels. "Zeus wants Archon to marry Artemis," exclaimed Gabriel in disbelief. "Indeed, when Hermes informed us of Archon's existence, father jumped on the idea to use the debt you owe us to gain Archon's cooperation," confirmed Athena. Michael and Uriel conflicted on their next course of action. "I'm afraid I cannot come with you, goddess of wisdom," spoke Archon, his voice of valor echoing throughout the room. "And why is that, successor of God?" asked Athena with an amused expression on her pretty face. "I already have plans to attend school in the mortal world and Uriel is already training me," replied Archon, causing Athena to smile at the angel's loyalty. Michael and Gabriel were shocked when Archon announced his plans for school. "You mean you'll accept the offer?" inquired Gabriel hopeful. Archon sent her a nod, causing Gabriel to cry tears of joy. Athena smiled at the scene unfolding in front of her, but she would still need to retrieve Archon. "I have a proposal then," announced Athena, gaining the attention of the angels. "You let us have Archon for as long as until he has to go to school. You can leave his training to us and we'll consider your debt paid," offered Athena. "Why does the god of the sky want Archon to marry Artemis of all the goddesses?" asked Michael curiously, while the other seraphs contemplated accepting the offer. "Artemis despises all men, and father does not like that trait of hers," replied Athena, sighing. "So he wants Archon to change her ways?" inquired Michael, Athena giving him a nod in confirmation. "What makes him think I can even do that?" asked Archon, dematerializing his armor as he asked this. Athena inspected his physical form for a few moments as Archon dematerialized his armor. She soon grinned as she spotted Archon's lean muscles and handsome appearance. "Well, Artemis certainly won't fall for your looks, but don't take that personally, she doesn't think any man is handsome," said Athena, Archon laughing awkwardly at that. "But to answer your question, I'm sure my father doesn't know if you can really do it. But I know he's willing to have faith in you," answered Athena, surprising Archon. The god of thunder didn't even know him, yet he trusted him, was what went through Archon's mind. Archon was contemplating his choices as he watched Athena smirk as she observed her brother's frail attempts at bypassing the spell cast on him. He turned behind him to see the four great seraphs speaking with each other. "I have no right to refuse as heaven owes them a debt, but if I'm going to be totally honest, their offer doesn't sound that bad," thought Archon, glancing between the two groups on both of his sides. "Goddess of wisdom, if I accept will I be taken to Mount Olympus immediately?" asked Archon curiously. Athena turned her attention away from Ares and back to Archon. "That's right, you might be surprised by how well you'll be treated, most of us are quite nice," replied Athena with an innocent smile. "Yeah, tell that to Medusa and Arachne," thought Archon with an awkward smile embracing his face. He had read about the Greek mythologies. "And who will I be trained by?" asked Archon with an arched eyebrow. Athena hummed for a moment before coming up with her answer. "You'll probably be trained by a majority of the gods in Olympus," replied Athena, Archon paling at her answer. "So I come to this room to go to school, but instead I get to be trained by gods of legend," thought Archon before sighing tiredly. The four angels behind him seemingly finished speaking. "Archon, we've come to the decision to let you decide. If you want to come with them then we won't stop you," informed Michael. Archon looked at Michael with an unsure expression. "We'll also prepare everything for you once you return. You'll be able to attend school immediately," added Michael with a bright smile. Archon returned the smile before turning to the goddess of wisdom. "Can I come back to visit?" asked Archon. Athena smiled and gave him a nod. "Then I'll come with you to Olympus," accepted Archon, causing Athena's smile to widen. "You don't need to worry about your stuff, Archon. I'll arrange for it to be transferred over to Olympus," called out Raphael. Archon smiled and gave him a nod before turning to the goddess of wisdom. "Don't you think this is a bit sudden?" asked Archon, a little surprised by how fast things have gone. "Phew, I suppose so, but we've been planning to get you on our side for the past few days," replied Athena. She soon offered him her hand as a magic circle began forming beneath her. Archon took a moment to look back at his fellow angels, who were smiling at him. Archon returned the smile before accepting Athena's hand. Athena soon deactivated the spell she had cast on the god of war, allowing Ares to stand up. "I should make you pay for that, sister," growled Ares, dusting himself off as he stood inside of the magic circle. Athena merely laughed at Ares' annoyance and looked back at the angels for one last time. "Fear not, we'll let him pay you all a visit. And Uriel, we'll teach him everything he needs to know," reassured Athena, receiving a nod from Uriel. And with that, they disappeared, leaving the four great seraphs back on their own again. Raphael left the meeting room to prepare the transport of Archon's furniture, while Gabriel sat on one of the chairs softly praying for Archon. Uriel and Michael stood there in silence for a few moments, thinking if they had made the right choice. But if peace between the Greek pantheon and heaven could be achieved from this, then it would all be worth it in the end, is what they both thought. Mount Olympus. The trio soon arrived at Olympus, with Archon gawking at the beautiful sight before him. The successor of God looked around the kingdom atop the mountain. There were birds flying around and blooming flowers around the gardens. "You can save the sightseeing for later, brat. Zeus wants to see you immediately," called out Ares, earning a small glare from Archon. "Don't give me that, I can end you in a heartbeat," growled Ares, annoyed at the glare Archon sent him. Before Archon could reply, Ares was smacked on the head by Athena. "Oh, shut it, brother. Just ignore him, Archon," said Athena, giving Archon a reassuring smile. Archon chuckled before following Athena, who gestured for him to come with her. The trio walked through Mount Olympus, earning a few stares from some gods and goddesses, but Archon was told to simply ignore them for now. His eyes moved around as he walked with the two deities. There were many beautiful sights to see in Olympus, such as the forge of Hephaestus which Archon could see from afar. And he could also see the god of music, Apollo, singing to some goddesses. Eyes forward, we're about to approach Zeus's throne. Informed Ares, Archon took one last glance at the venues in Olympus before facing forward as he was told by the god of war. The trio eventually arrived in front of a set of two massive golden doors. As they approached it, however, they heard the mumbled sounds of a young lady shouting from within the throne room. The doors burst open, a woman with long silver hair and bright blue eyes stomped out of the room. She wore a green huntress outfit and a curved silver bow resided on her clenched fist. She ignored Athena and Ares as she passed them and went to her separate way. Athena sighed and motioned for them to walk into the throne room. Ares huffed and pushed Archon forward slightly, annoying the angel. The three of them stepped inside of the throne room. Archon could see a muscular man with a white beard sitting on his throne and another man with dark blue hair and a beard standing right beside the one on the throne. Zeus and Poseidon, thought Archon as the two men in front of him matched the descriptions of the god of thunder and the god of the sea. Poseidon turned his attention to the new visitors in the throne room while Zeus sat on his chair, rage leaking out of him. Poseidon, sensing that his brother did not wish to speak right now, decided to speak on his brother's behalf. "Greetings, you must be the angel that Michael was trying so hard to hide," spoke Poseidon. Archon laughed awkwardly and scratched his head as he stepped forward. "I suppose that is me," said Archon. Poseidon smiled as he inspected Archon. "Good. Take that arrogant girl's virginity already then," roared Zeus, startling Archon and Athena. Poseidon sighed at his brother's outrage, while Ares tried to stop himself from bursting out in laughter. "Brother, let me handle this. You are not in a greeting mood right now," said Poseidon, getting a few mumbled words from Zeus before lightning struck and the god of the sky disappeared. "I apologize deeply on behalf of my brother. Artemis has been irritating him for the past few days." "Apologize, Poseidon." Archon waved his hand, gesturing that it was nothing to worry about. "Anyway, from what I have gathered, you will be staying here with us for the next few years?" inquired Poseidon with an arched eyebrow. "Yes, he will be here with us for around 3 years," confirmed Athena, stepping forward. "I see, then I hope that Mount Olympus is to your liking," said Poseidon, sending Archon a wide smile. "Your home is truly beautiful, I've never seen anything like it," complimented Archon truthfully. "Glad to hear it. But we have more important matters to address for now," said Poseidon, getting nods of agreement from Archon and Athena. "You see, your arrival here was quite rushed, so you might have to stay with Athena or Ares for a few days until we can prepare your own room," informed Poseidon, getting an accepting nod from Archon. "Like hell I'm letting that kid sleep with me," muttered Ares, crossing his arms. Athena sent him a glare, causing him to silence himself. "Luckily this won't affect the training you were promised, so we can begin your training by tomorrow. I'll have Hermes prepare a schedule for you," continued Poseidon. Archon nodded, signaling for the god of the sea to continue. "Only a few gods were informed about your arrival, so I suggest you spend the rest of the day acquainting yourself with most of them. If you can get along with them, then you might be able to train with them and learn about their unique powers," added Poseidon, exciting Archon. "Zeus was supposed to talk with you about your upcoming relationship with Artemis, so I'll leave that topic to him," said Poseidon, walking down to Archon. The angel stiffened as the god of the sea approached him. Poseidon took Archon's hand and gave him a bracelet. The bracelet was carved in a unique way, it had the carvings of a hydra embedded on it. And a blue jewel was engraved between the bracelet. "This will help you on our training, keep it safe until then," said Poseidon, donning a wide smile. Archon happily accepted the gift and wore the bracelet, thanking the god for it. "It will also serve as proof that you are approved by me, so the gods will know not to mess with you," added Poseidon, chuckling. Archon laughed lightly before giving the god of the sea a nod, which Poseidon happily returned. "I will leave the rest in your hands, Athena," said Poseidon, getting a nod from Athena, who donned her confident grin. Poseidon glanced at Ares and Archon before disappearing in a splash of water. "Alright, let's get you some proper clothes and a meal first. And then you can speak with the other gods," said Athena before turning around and going through the doors. Archon quickly followed her, while Ares huffed and vanished in a burst of fire, but not before muttering some words to Archon. "Welcome to Olympus, successor of God." "An angel is in Olympus," mused a tall skeletal being with interest. This skeletal individual was sitting down on a throne around a dark burning landscape. This individual was the god of the dead, Hades. "Apparently your brother used the dead heaven Odar faction to bring him to Mount Olympus," informed the Grim Reaper kneeling in front of Hades. This Grim Reaper was the strongest being in the underworld, aside from Hades. Hades hummed in amusement at the new events that had taken place. He was already coming up with multiple ways to sway the angel to his side, but he wanted to see if the angel showed any greater potential before he tried anything. "What is the angel doing right now, Pluto?" asked Hades curiously. The Grim Reaper took a moment before answering. "Our sources tell us that he is currently on his way to acquaint himself with the gods," replied Pluto. "I see, then make preparations for his arrival here," ordered Hades. Pluto bowed and left to complete his task. Hades leaned back on his throne and hummed evilly. "I simply cannot wait to see this," mused Hades with a non-existent grin. Mount Olympus. Archon was on his way to speak with the creator of his armor, Hephaestus. He wanted to thank the god of blacksmiths for doing a great job with his treasured armor set. Athena had warned Archon not to get into any fights with the gods, especially with the arrogant ones like Ares. He was also forbidden from meeting with Artemis until Zeus had said otherwise. After a few minutes of walking, Archon eventually arrived at Hephaestus's forge. He soon found the god sitting down on a small chair and cleaning a warhammer. Archon compassed himself before approaching the god. Hephaestus noticed the new presence and looked up to see the angel approaching him. He was very curious on why there was an angel in Olympus and why he wanted to speak with him. "How may I help you, angel?" asked Hephaestus, placing the warhammer down for a moment. I just wanted to thank you for crafting my armor," spoke Archon, materializing his armor for a brief moment. "Oh. So that armor was for you? Let me tell you that set right there is one of my greatest creations," said Hephaestus. Archon smiled and materialized Solarian. "Maybe you can make something similar to this?" inquired Archon, handing the spear to the god. Hephaestus inspected the spear, astonished at the brilliant craftsmanship. He used his magic to determine the weapon's stats and was surprised at how powerful the spear was. "Boy, this spear is stronger than Poseidon's trident," said Hephaestus in awe. Archon smiled proudly and crossed his arms. "I can let you borrow the spear for a bit if you'd like," inquired Archon, Hephaestus perking up as he said this. "It would be an honor to work with a weapon like this," exclaimed Hephaestus, quickly placing the spear down on his work table. "But why are you doing this?" asked Hephaestus curiously, looking back to Archon. "Well, I wanted to have a good first impression with you and the rest of the gods. I'll be staying in Olympus for a few years," replied Archon, Hephaestus humming in interest. "I assume that you'll be training?" inquired Hephaestus, receiving a nod from Archon. "Alrighty then, I'll teach you in the art of blacksmiths," declared Hephaestus. Archon smiled and gave him a nod of anticipation. "When did they say your training would begin?" asked Hephaestus curiously. "Tomorrow, but Poseidon said that he'd have Hermes prepare a schedule for me," replied Archon, Hephaestus nodding in understanding. Before either of the two could speak, a familiar armored man arrived at the forge. Archon arched an eyebrow at the arrival of the armored figure, but decided to stay quiet for now. "I need a new warhammer," spoke the armored man in a deep voice. "Perfect timing then, I just finished with one," said Hephaestus, handing the man the warhammer. The armored man looked behind him to see Archon standing there, an observant expression on his face. "What are you looking at, brat?" asked the armored man, one that Archon remembered clearly. "I'm just curious. Why does the god of war need so many weapons when he isn't even fighting any wars right now?" replied Archon, the god of war huffing as he heard this. "War is always close when I'm around, it's best to be prepared. I'll make sure that you realize that when we train," huffed Ares, the god of war. Archon kept quiet, signaling for Ares to take his new warhammer and leave. "Rough start?" inquired Hephaestus, noticing the tension between Ares and Archon. "I guess," sighed Archon. The angel soon left the forge after some small chatter with the god and went to meet with the other deities. Archon would speak with Aphrodite, Hera, Apollo, and many other deities. He would also receive his training schedule from Hermes, who was quite eager to meet with him. The two enjoyed a long chat before parting ways. The day was soon ending, and Archon couldn't find any more gods that he needed to acquaint himself with. He had met a few of them, but he decided to think hard on any major gods he hadn't met. Only one came to mind, and it seems that he didn't need to try and find him, for the god found him first. Right now, Archon was face to face with a menacing Grim Reaper who had a long scythe in hand. "Lord Hades wishes to see you," spoke the Grim Reaper before opening a portal. Archon hesitantly walked through and was surprised when he arrived at what looked like hell. He soon concluded that he was in the underworld. It made sense since he was meeting with Hades. Archon followed the Grim Reaper that had called him, and the two walked through many groups of Grim Reapers. Most of them seemed inferior to the one leading him to Hades, but he could sense some powerful ones among them. Eventually though, Archon would arrive at what looked like a throne room which had a long dinner table in the middle. The Grim Reaper pulled a chair out for Archon, the angel soon sitting down and inspecting the feast placed down on the table. There was a lot of fancy meals, and Archon had to admit he was getting really hungry after speaking with most of the gods today. But Archon decided to turn his attention to the god of death sitting not too far from him. The tall skeletal god seemed to be inspecting Archon, which made the successor of God a little uncomfortable. "No need to be so tense, Angel," spoke Hades, surprising Archon slightly. I just didn't expect to meet you today, Lord Hades," excused Archon, resulting in the laughter of the god of death. "I understand that people don't usually expect the god of death to come calling for them, oh and just Hades is fine," said Hades. Archon smiled awkwardly and turned his attention to the food. "Please go ahead, it's not like I'm capable of eating anyway," said Hades, noticing Archon staring at him for permission. The angel gave Hades a nod before digging into the food prepared by the Grim Reapers, which was surprisingly good. "I have to say I was really interested when I was informed of your arrival, Angel," began Hades, gaining Archon's attention. "Never in my life have I witnessed an angel staying in Olympus for longer than a few minutes, you must be pretty important." "You could say that," muttered Archon, laughing awkwardly. Hades grinned as he believed that he just hit the spot and he would try to push his luck further. "How important are we talking here?" "Important enough to be kept from you," spoke a new visitor, lightning striking down right behind Archon. The angel almost spilled his food after being startled by the sudden intrusion, but soon composed himself. "What is the meaning of this intrusion, brother?" asked Hades, annoyed that his plans have been delayed. Zeus, Hades' brother, huffed and approached Archon. "I have calmed down and wished to speak with the boy about other pressing matters," replied Zeus, gesturing for Archon to come to him. The angel quickly complied and bowed down to Hades before following Zeus. Hades clicked his non-existent tongue in annoyance as Zeus teleported away with his newfound interest. Pluto, who had been at the sides the entire time, approached his master. "What shall we do now, Lord Hades?" asked Pluto, disappointed that his master's plans did not work out. Hades sighed and glanced at Pluto before turning his attention to the crimson sky above him. "We wait, this will only serve to delay my plans for him. And now that I've clarified a few things, I've decided that I will make him my warrior," replied Hades, glaring darkly at the sky. Mount Olympus. Zeus had teleported into the throne room with the successor of God. The powerful god sat down on his throne while Archon stood a few feet away from him, nervous. Zeus noticed this and sighed. "Calm yourself, Angel. I'm not usually so grumpy," reassured Zeus. Archon loosened up a bit but still kept a bit tense. "Are we here to talk about my engagement?" asked Archon, receiving a nod from Zeus. "Glad to see that I don't have much to explain. I hope you will be able to control that man-hating woman," said Zeus, eliciting a nervous laugh from Archon. "Why do you think that I'll be able to change her view on men?" asked Archon curiously. "Truth be told, I don't have high hopes for you," started Zeus, earning a frown from Archon. "But that doesn't mean that you won't be able to change her. I will inform you of my plan, listen closely," added Zeus. Archon gave him a nod, signaling for Zeus to begin his explanation. "She is one of the few gods that you haven't met, I assume that I am correct?" inquired Zeus, receiving a nod from Archon. "Then tomorrow you will meet her. I will have Athena accompany you so that she doesn't completely ignore you. Once Athena explains your situation, I want you to introduce yourself properly and strike a conversation. I'll warn you right now, she will immediately assume you are a beast the moment her eyes are laid on you, so tread carefully. Do not say anything that will cause her to get angry, otherwise you will lose your chance to form an acceptable relationship with her," explained Zeus, Archon listening carefully. "You will not tell her about your potential engagement, it will be I who will inform her of that. Once I begin seeing signs of affection from her, then I will tell her about the engagement," declared Zeus. Archon was denied any argument. "If you fail, you will be returned to heaven and any of your training here in Olympus will be abandoned," informed Zeus, receiving a frown from Archon. "So basically I'm being forced to court Artemis?" inquired Archon, eliciting a chuckle from Zeus. "I suppose you are, but don't worry, I'm sure she'll make a fine wife," laughed Zeus, Archon sighing as the god of the sky laughed on his throne. "Oh, I almost forgot, Angel," called out Zeus, getting Archon's attention. "Stay away from Hades." The next day. Archon had returned to Athena's chambers after his discussion with Zeus. He had been incredibly tired after meeting with so many gods that day, so much that he had practically jumped on the bed of Athena, not realizing that she was already there. Athena decided she would tease the angel about that event the next day, though she knew that he would be surprised by what he had done. Archon stirred on the bed, he was about to wake up. The goddess of wisdom smirked as she felt the angel beginning to regain consciousness. Archon softly groaned and dug his face into his pillow tiredly, clearly annoyed that he was waking up. "This pillow feels weird," thought Archon as he explored the pillow's structure. He raised his hand and grabbed the pillow curiously, but imagine his surprise when he heard a moan after touching the pillow. Archon's eyes shot open as he realized what he had been doing. When his sight came back to him, he saw Athena in front of him with a clear blush. Archon blushed hard and stumbled backwards, falling off the bed. Athena grinned as Archon fell off the bed, she would tease him for the rest of eternity for this. Archon groaned as his head hit the floor and he slowly stood up, regaining his composure. I apologize for my insolence. Apologized Archon, bowing his head. Athena giggled and grabbed Archon, returning his face to her impressive bust. Archon mumbled as he struggled against her grip, she was a god of war too after all. There's nothing to apologize for, Archon. Teenagers usually have uncontrollable hormones. Reassured Athena, eventually letting go of Archon. The angel got some breath before compassing himself. Anyway, my father already informed me of the plan. I'll bring you to Artemis after breakfast. Informed Athena before standing up and heading to the kitchen. Archon soon followed the goddess of wisdom and enjoyed a delightful meal with the goddess. The duo would eventually begin their search for Artemis, which took a few minutes. She was found speaking with a few of her hunters. Athena waited for the hunters to disperse before approaching Artemis. Artemis, how are you today? Greeted Athena, getting the goddess's attention. Artemis smiled at the sight of Athena before frowning at the one behind her. What is that beast doing here? Asked Artemis with disgust. Archon frowned at this but kept himself calm. Athena sighed and pushed Archon forward, much to the angel's surprise. Artemis crossed her arms and inspected the tall angel, not affected by his charms at all. My name is Archon. I'm an angel from heaven, nice to meet you. Greeted Archon nervously. Artemis scowled at Archon's introduction and huffed. Well, it certainly isn't nice to meet you. Archon flinched at that and cleared his throat, he already understood why Zeus was so desperate to change the goddess of the hunt. Athena noticed Archon's struggle and decided to help out. Come on, he's an angel, why don't you give him a chance? Inquired Athena, receiving a huff from Artemis. Angel or fallen angel, it doesn't matter, a beast is a beast. And unless he can prove to me that he is worthy of any other alias other than a weak beast, then I will call him as such. Said Artemis, causing Athena to frown and sigh. Archon however did not take to her words as kindly. Call a beast for all I care, but I'm definitely not weak. Declared Archon, holding his fist up confidently. Artemis huffed and pointed at Archon mockingly, much to the angel's annoyance. Are you trying to tell me that you aren't as helplessly desperate for attention as you look? Inquired Artemis, pointing towards Archon's well-developed body. Athena was almost tempted to laugh, but decided to hold it in. I didn't train to look good. I trained so that I could protect my faction when the time came. Retorted Archon, receiving a proud smile from Athena. But Artemis was not impressed, although she was finding the situation a bit amusing. A noble cause, one that I doubt you'll cling to. Artemis voiced her doubt. Archon grit his teeth, but he knew that he would have to control his anger, even if she insulted his dedication to his fellow angels. Then I'll prove you wrong. Muttered Archon, but loud enough for Artemis to catch. Oh. Mused Artemis, an arrogant grin etching itself onto her face. Fight me. Right here, right now. Challenged Archon, spreading his arms in a challenging manner. Artemis scoffed and summoned her bow, which was a lean and shiny silver hue. That's all you beasts seem to ever think about. Battle. Mocked Artemis, aiming her bow directly at Archon. I accept your challenge, beast. Artemis had agreed to the challenge, was prepared to take it. How about we set some arrangements? Suggested Athena, who was interested in the outcome of the battle. Arrangements. Repeated Artemis confused. Athena cleared her throat and raised a finger. If Archon wins, then you'll have to do what he wants, and if you win, then you can kill him. Clarified Athena, much to Archon's dismay. What? Exclaimed Archon, clearly not satisfied with Athena's suggestion. I like it. Very well, I agree to these arrangements. Agreed Artemis, itching to kill the beast in front of her. I don't. Shouted Archon, but it seemed as if his opinion didn't matter as Athena began the countdown. 3. Archon cursed himself for challenging Artemis the way he did, but he had no choice now. Archon quickly equipped his full armor and summoned Solarian to his side. 2. Artemis grinned in excitement, she hadn't killed a man in a few months. But she knew to never underestimate an opponent, so she didn't let her guard down, even against someone she saw as a weak beast. 1. Feeling a barrier form around the area, Archon looked around and saw that a few maidens, hunters and gods had gathered around. They had felt Artemis's aura and it was definitely hostile, which was probably what attracted the crowd. Start. Archon snapped his attention towards Artemis as Athena had finished the countdown. The goddess of the hunt had already placed 3 arrows on the string and quickly fired at Archon. Archon deflected the arrows with Solarian and followed through by leaping towards Artemis. She huffed and evaded the fast incoming angel. Archon was stunned at Artemis's speed but quickly compassed himself. Artemis's aura strengthened and she fired purple flaming arrows at Archon. The angel was surprised at how fast the arrows were coming at him now, but he quickly adjusted and flew up to dodge the arrows. The successor of God aimed his spear at Artemis and fired a stream of rampaging fire at her. Artemis's eyes widened in shock for a moment before she backflipped and fired an arrow straight at Archon's spear. The arrow hit and caused Archon's aim to slip. The fire stream lost control for a moment and nearly broke the barrier, resulting in Athena hurriedly strengthening the barrier. Artemis huffed and fired another arrow at Solarian, causing it to slip out of Archon's hand. Archon clicked his tongue in displeasure and went to grab Solarian, only to be stopped as sharp vines erupted from the ground and trapped Archon. Archon grunted and desperately tried to break through the vines. Artemis laughed at his struggle and approached the golden spear on the ground. She inspected it for a moment before throwing it away and soon aiming an arrow at Archon's head. The angel's eyes widened in fear and Archon moved around more than he did previously. The vines began breaking and this was Artemis's cue to fire her arrow, which she flawlessly did. Archon's heart skipped a beat as the arrow was mere inches from his skull and it would have pierced it had he not turned into smoke and reappeared behind Artemis with 2 copies of Solarian in his hands. Artemis held her breath for a moment as she felt the killing intent from behind her. She spun around and fired 3 arrows at Archon, but with 2 Solarians in hand, they were deflected effortlessly. Archon suddenly vanished again and was now inches away from Artemis's face, they were so close that it looked like they were about to kiss. Artemis attempted to back away, but Archon had grabbed her by the waist and pulled her to him. Archon used his extra copy of Solarian to get Artemis's bow off of her, dropping the duplicated spear as he did so. Artemis struggled and attempted to break away from Archon's grip, but with his armor, it was impossible to break free. The successor of God leaned forward and stared into Artemis's bright blue eyes, causing the most minuscule blush to appear on her cheeks, and the blush faded away as soon as it came. The duo stood there in silence, neither one of them moving an inch. The light of the sun reflected off of Archon's golden armor, which only proved to make the scene more beautiful than it already was. The feeling unknown to Artemis had overcome her entire being, she felt like she should have hated the feeling, but it was somehow comfortable. Eventually Archon had let her go, and he had dematerialized his armor and spear. Artemis stepped backwards unconsciously and looked away from Archon. Athena had watched the entire scene and she was absolutely thrilled. "Don't even think I didn't see that blush, Artemis," thought Athena with a wide smile before putting down the barrier. The crowd around the battle cheered and clapped for the 2 fighters. Artemis clicked her tongue in annoyance after realizing that she had lost and now she would have to do whatever the beast wanted. Archon laughed awkwardly as he felt the negative aura coming from Artemis. "Show's over folks, time to go home," called out Athena, effectively dispersing the crowd. She eventually approached the duo as soon as the sizable crowd had left them to their own business. Well, looks like somebody lost a challenge," teased Athena, receiving a cute pout from Artemis. "Whatever, I let my guard down that's all," retorted Artemis, resulting in Athena laughing out loud. "Anyway, what do you want Artemis to do for you, Archon?" asked Athena curiously. Artemis shuddered at the thought of Archon forcing her to do disgusting things for him. But little did she know that Archon's plans were nowhere near anything like that. "I want you to accept me," said Archon, facing Artemis with a serious expression. Artemis couldn't form any words, she was so shocked at how simple but complicated Archon's order was. "What?" was all Artemis could say, even Athena was curious about what he had meant by accepting him. "What I mean is that I don't want you to treat me like the beast you think I am," clarified Archon, surprising Artemis. "I know that many things happened to you that caused you to despise men, but I'm asking for a chance to prove myself," continued Archon, much to Artemis's amusement. "I see," mused Artemis, holding her chin in deep thought. Archon glanced at Athena who looked like she was smiling very openly. "Very well," agreed Artemis after some deep thinking. "Very well," repeated Archon with an arched eyebrow, as if asking for clarification. "I'll give you a chance to prove yourself, idiot," clarified Artemis, slightly annoyed at Archon's naive nature. Archon and Athena laughed at Artemis's cute pout, irritating the goddess of the hunt. "Stop laughing," exclaimed Artemis, her pout becoming even cuter. Archon eventually ran out of laughter and gave Artemis a bright smile. "Thank you for giving me a chance. Underworld." "Ahahahahaha." Hades's deep laughter echoed throughout the throne room, a few of the Grim Reapers even shuddered at the shrouded aura Hades was releasing right now. "Is something funny, Lord Hades?" asked Pluto, confused at his master's sudden burst of laughter. Hades calmed himself down before answering his minion, he gathered some air before exhaling and relaxing on his throne. "Not funny, Pluto. Simply relaxing," replied Hades, leaning his back on his throne. "Relaxing?" repeated Pluto in confusion, what was there to be relaxed about? Was what Pluto was thinking. "I have found a rather compelling way to earn the favor of the angel," explained Hades, much to Pluto's curiosity. "How so?" asked Pluto, receiving a chuckle from Hades. "All in due time, Pluto. All in due time," prolonged Hades, much to Pluto's suspense and disappointment. Aphrodite's chambers. Archon was currently sitting nervously on the bed of Aphrodite. Athena had left Archon by himself after their little confrontation with Artemis, and with nothing else but his training to do, Archon was led to the goddess of beauty. Apparently she would be his first teacher for the day. After his training with Aphrodite, he would have to train with Ares, and he certainly wasn't really looking forward to that. Aphrodite had told Archon to stay at her bed until she was finished preparing the necessary training materials, and Archon could do nothing but comply. As time passed though, Archon begun blushing harder and harder. The chambers of Aphrodite held the smell of lust, it practically covered the entire place. This caused a blush to make its way onto Archon's cheeks, but he had been able to resist so far. Eventually, Aphrodite had returned, with nothing but a two-piece. Archon gawked at the sight of her but quickly turned away, much to the goddess's amusement. "It's time to introduce you to my training, dear," spoke Aphrodite, her seductive mature voice echoing throughout her chambers. "What type of training is this?" exclaimed Archon, blushing. "This training will help improve your resistance skills. We can't have you drooling at the sight of a pretty naked woman in battle now, can we?" inquired Aphrodite, walking towards Archon. Archon stammered as she approached him. He was still a teenager, and Gabriel had never shown him anything like what Aphrodite was right now. It made him wonder what Gabriel would look like in a two-piece. "What am I thinking?" exclaimed Archon in his thoughts, quickly shaking away the thought of Gabriel. Aphrodite giggled as she pushed Archon down on her bed and leaned on him. You like this, don't you?" hummed Aphrodite seductively, causing Archon to gulp in fear for his virginity. "Don't worry, I won't go that far," reassured Aphrodite before biting on Archon's ear. Ares' gladiator ring. Ares swung a massive warhammer at Archon, but the angel managed to dodge in time. Ares huffed and brought forth his chains which wrapped around Archon's entire body. Archon thrashed around in the chains, but to no avail. Ares chuckled and heated up his chains, steam beginning to come off the chains. Archon gulped and was tempted to summon Solarian and break out, but he was denied any use of his abilities in this training. "You rely too much on your weapons. What if you find yourself in a situation where you cannot use anything but your body?" scolded Ares, much to Archon's annoyance. "I doubt that I'll find myself stuck in a situation like that," argued Archon, causing Ares to laugh out loud. "Arrogance doesn't suit an angel like you," informed Ares before swinging Archon around with the chains and throwing him into a wall. Swamps of Lerna. Archon was currently fighting for his life as a Lernian Hydra was firing its poisonous breath at him. Poseidon was close by, watching Archon face off against the same type of Hydra Heracles had killed so long ago. Archon was not allowed to use any of his angelic abilities, just like with his training with Ares, he was only allowed to use water magic. The bracelet Poseidon had gifted him allowed him to easily use water magic, and he was instructed to wear it until he could use the magic type by himself. The successor of God narrowly dodged another bowl of poison and countered by unleashing a wave of water at the Hydra, causing the beast to stagger back for a moment. Archon used this chance to create a spear of water and threw it straight at one of the Hydra's heads. The Hydra roared and easily blocked the spear with its breath. Archon gulped and quickly began dodging the enraged Hydra's bowls of poison, while the laughter of Poseidon could easily be heard behind him. Domain of Death. The minor segment of the underworld, named the Domain of Death, was where Archon was currently residing. He had been told that this was the area of his next training session, and by the name of the place, he did not expect any type of kind training. "So you are the one I must train," spoke a deep hollow voice. Archon turned around and spotted what he first mistook for a fallen angel. "You are," muttered Archon in confusion. "Thanatos, god of death," informed Thanatos, Archon's next teacher. "Are you a fallen angel?" asked Archon curiously, spotting the black wings erupting from behind the back of Thanatos. "Close, but not quite," replied Thanatos, flapping his wings and approaching Archon. "I will be instructing you on dark magic," said Thanatos, creating a dark orb within his palm. "Wouldn't that be forbidden for an angel?" inquired Archon with an arched eyebrow. "From what I hear you cannot fall," said Thanatos, before passing the dark orb to Archon, who hastily caught it. Archon held the orb on his palm, the dark orb colliding with his holy aura. Thanatos huffed and crossed his arms in amusement. "Normally an angel would either die or fall if that orb even touched them. This is proof of your immunity," mused Thanatos. "However, due to your inheritance, you should only use the results of our training as a last resort," suggested Thanatos, receiving a nod from Archon. Thanatos then took the orb back and enhanced it. "Prepare yourself, for you shall become an angel of light and dark." And so how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.